Good morning, world. This is Steve Rao from Pod TV's World Edition, live from PBS Carolina studios in Wake County in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina. Today, I'm the host of Pod TV's World Edition. And on World Edition, we talk about great news from around the world, talk about innovation, and what we can do to build back better and stronger from the COVID pandemic, if it ever ends. And we pray that it does. Today, my monologue and our discussion is going to be about the miraculous achievement of President Joe Biden and the United States Senate arriving at a bipartisan $1.7 trillion infrastructure plan. I want to talk about why this happened and why it should be celebrated as a big win for this Democratic president, who's the first Democrat in the White House, as long as I can remember, to achieve a bipartisan deal. I think there's a couple of reasons why. First of all, the issue is just of infrastructure is less polarizing. Let's remember that President Obama only got 3 votes on his stimulus bill back in 2009, and he got 0 votes of Republicans on the Affordable Care Act. And President Biden got 0 Republican votes on his pandemic relief. That bill had to make it only through reconciliation. But people are much more willing to rally around roads and bridges and infrastructure and renewable energy and green infrastructure, and it makes it much easier to come together on this issue. The second reason is I think credit needs to go to President Biden. In this case, experience in the White House does matter. This is a man who spent 36 years in the Senate, and some friends of mine in Washington say they see even this president, a former U.S. Senator and Vice President of the United States, frequently on his phone, calling many senators who he knows by heart their cell phone numbers, along with world leaders. He's been doing meetings in the White House, coffees, lunches, very accessible. We don't hear a lot from tweets, not a lot of showmanship like President Trump, but at the end of the day, he worked hard. He was willing to give up concessions to Republicans to achieve the goal of a bipartisan infrastructure deal. The third reason is the centrist Democrats that came to the table to make this happen. Most notably, West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Kristen Sinema, who worked along with President Biden and even Republicans to make sure that they could have consensus on a bill that they could all agree on. And Senator Bob Portman from Ohio, who will retire, also had nothing to lose, so even he joined in the fight. The final is the political calculus of Mitch McConnell. Perhaps Senator McConnell sees that if he can rally behind infrastructure now, he can, in the midterm elections, say that, hey, I stood behind infrastructure. Remember, this is a senator who said that he was not going to support Biden on any deal. And he also said that about President Obama. The rest is yet to come. This bill will now go to the House for approval. And if approved by the House, will be signed by the President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden. Now, the honeymoon may be over, though, because the Democrats are now proposing a $3.7 trillion blueprint, which makes much more investments for the Green New Deal social infrastructure. But my take is this. I think bipartisanship achievements are critically important for the American people. I only hope that this same kind of model can be used for issues like immigration and other issues that our nation needs. They desperately need our politicians to come together to show them that they are there to govern, to lead, to make the tough decisions, and often give up what is best for their own political interests for what is good for the nation. It's a good start, Mr. President. Keep up the good work. And now on our show, we have Mark Lee, my co-host, and others that will be joining our panel for this discussion.
Yeah, we definitely got at least one other, and I'm going to bring him in and everything very shortly. But I was going to tell you that as you were talking, I was looking up in the Voice of America, you know, that great publication and everything. And they actually said that there had been and I think I vaguely remember this, a bipartisan deal struck by Obama back in 2013. So some 18 years ago. And that was deal that was passed, there was a budget agreement, and of course there was a lot of infighting, as you said, and a lot of fighting between the parties. But they somehow managed to get that deal signed while he was on vacation with his family in Hawaii. So that was another time that it happened that actually they did manage to get a bipartisan deal passed and all of that. So that's one time that he managed to go across the aisles. I think that they said on one of the other articles that there was like 4 times that they felt that legacy president had done that. And then before I bring in Sasha, the other thing that I was going to bring up really quickly and everything was I went outside yesterday in the late evening around 9 or 10 o'clock, had to run to the corner store to grab a soda and a couple of other household necessities. And it was humid as all get out there. So it was definitely some oppressive heat that was going on. And there is still oppressive heat going on today as well. So one of the things I'm curious to see about Sasha is how is the heat going in Canada? Because I know here in North Carolina, we're supposed to be having a heat warning going on from about noon till 7. So I hope that you've got plenty of water with you as you're traveling out and about, Steve, because this weather is no joke. It was humid as all get out there last night. And definitely, I think they're expecting temperatures around the high 90s or hundreds today. So probably it'll feel like 100, but it's going to be in the high 90s. So definitely, that's just not here in North Carolina, but that's in the various parts of the country. We know what's going on in California and in the western part of Canada as well. So on that note, I'll bring in Sasha Starr and everything.
Good morning.
How is the weather going where you are? Because like I said, I just had to run a quick errand last night around 9 o'clock and everything. And I will tell you, I was thinking about going to a area restaurant. I changed my mind because that humidity was just kind of stifling. So after I got what I had to get, I turned myself right around because it's about a block walk to where I had to go. And it would have been another block or a block and a half to go to the restaurant that I was thinking about going to. So now that I think about it, it might have been closer to 8:30 versus 9. But it was just oppressive heat. So I don't know how the heat is doing in your part of Canada, but this was at nighttime and it was still feeling not all that comfortable.
Yeah.
Well, it's a seasonal temperature, maybe a little bit hotter than usual, but it's summer. It's still middle of August, so we expect that weather to remain so for sure, couple of weeks. Then it will start going to opposite direction. So far there are no big surprises. We are spared of all these horrible things in British Columbia, and we'll hope it will just go away as soon as possible.
I agree. Coming back to what Steve was talking about, I know he's got some other things he'd love to talk about, but one of the things he definitely mentioned was he was praising President Biden for the bipartisan agreement that was reached recently and everything. What is the take of that around the globe and around the world, and particularly around Canada? So if you're watching your news and you're watching, maybe talking to your friends that exist in other countries and everything, are they pleased with what they're seeing, and are they optimistic about some of the other deals that are on the plate, to put it the way that Steve was talking about? Because there are deals possibly around immigration, around other parts of the infrastructure and other things. So what is the take that you're hearing from Canada as to whether they're pleased with what's going on, or do they not even care because they're concerned about their own situations in their own country?
Well, can you be at the same time happy for President Biden and at the same time remain cautiously pessimistic overall? Because this infrastructure bill, as much as it's needed, really, I mean, the fact is, yes, the infrastructure requires a lot. However, the way it's done, the way it's fought, unclear how it will be implemented, how much money will be stolen from the public as a result of this. But I guess it's, unless private business does it, whatever government does, there is always leakage and unfortunately overspending and so on. But so it's a tough choice. Either you don't go for infrastructure bill at all, which is horrible decision, or you go for it, but then you are facing different problems. They're not unbeatable. I mean, with a shrewd management, it's possible. But even the shrewd management now, it's a rare catch, and because of the labor market, there's a shortage of people who are actually willing to work and available for hire. It's I have many questions how it will be implemented or so on. So on one hand, you have to go for it. On the other hand, how you do it, that's a key issue, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that sorry, I have an echo here. But
Yeah.
I think. Sorry, there's an echo. I apologize. But if you want to. Sorry, Mark. Can you?
Yeah. Let me mute myself and see if that's on my side. It could be over here.
So anyway, I don't know whether to chime out. The bottom line is that this bill gives 110 billion for roads and bridges, 66 billion for railroads, 65 billion for the power grid, 65 billion for broadband. And what's interesting is for the infrastructure issues like green infrastructure, 55 billion for water infrastructure, 39 billion for public transit, 47 billion for cybersecurity and climate change, 21 billion for the environment, 25 billion for airports, 17 billion for ports. But the point I want to make is that, I brought this up on PBS Carolina, is that, it's a great start, but, the Republicans keep attacking this 3.7 trillion blueprint as socialism, overreaching government. But the fact of the matter is, take a couple of examples in the additional bill by the Democrat. It's calling for $37 billion for electric charging stations versus only $7.5 billion. President Biden's goal was 500,000 by 2030. There's only 43,000 electric charging stations in the United States. I don't even know if the power grid has the power to support those electric charging stations. But until you have more charging stations, you're not going to get more cars on the road. And in terms of investments in the clean green economy, 198 billion for clean energy, another 135 billion for forest fires and carbon emissions. And so the point I'm trying to make is that these are investments, and I think that Mark, you brought up the weather that you're feeling. We're all feeling this extreme heat, weather patterns. Think about poorer communities, minority communities who may lose their house in a fire or a storm during a pandemic. So these are things I think that we have to think about and continue to make the investments. I wish Shaquille Latimer here would have debate me on this, because he basically says, well, that's social infrastructure. Infrastructure is only roads and bridges. But I think I don't agree with AOC often, but I like this idea of a new Green Deal, and the idea being that it's going to be about climate change, it's going to be about jobs, and it's going to be about lifting up communities, right? So.
Yeah, interesting points you bring up there and everything. One of the things I was going to add to that was that, it's interesting because one of the debates that goes on regularly is how much role, and actually Sasha even alluded to it, should private business and private corporations have when we're dealing with some of these social issues, but also some of the non-social issues, and how much of that should be at the hands of government. That's always a constant conversation going on and all of that. I know that even this week and everything, I can give an example of a private private corporation that is doing something this week. And, we were given a warning about it, but at the same time, if it happens, I'll be tortured and just having to deal with it, because Duke Energy apparently in this particular area that I live in has sent a notice that at some point they may decide to cut off the power because they're doing some repair work and all of that. And they're going to do that in the middle of a heat wave. So definitely sometimes you have to wonder about the decisions that corporate America makes and everything, because I'm going I think you might want to pick a different time to do that versus doing it when it's a close to 100 degrees and folks are actually going to be dependent on that Duke power to run their AC. So like I said, it'll be interesting to see what happens, and definitely I haven't heard anybody complaining, and the complex here did send a notice giving us a heads up that it could happen anytime this weekend. So, like I said, sometimes I wonder about the decisions that corporate America makes, but I also wonder sometimes about the decision that government makes. And there is always that dilemma as to how much power do we want corporations to have. There's even been that conversation around the prison system, because most of our prisons, or a lot of our prisons, I shouldn't say most because I don't know the exact figure, but a lot of them are privately run. They're privately run prisons, and they're not run by a government agency and things of that nature. So that's a conversation that comes up. There are some other businesses out there in various industries that do the same thing. I mean, there was also that conversation around the privately owned farms, because definitely there are privately owned farms, but there are also corporate farms as well. So definitely those kind of conversations of individually private corporations and the government are stuff that happens regularly here in America, and how much control should each have, and all of that. So I'd love to hear Sasha's thoughts, and maybe you have some thoughts as well, Steve, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, because I don't know what the balance is in Canada.
I'm going to throw an issue out to Sasha, because I'd like to get his perspective. And I might have to leave for a few minutes, guys, and I'm going to come back. I actually have a double book today, but I might leave and come back in about 20 minutes. But I want to get the point. In addition to, changing laws and regulations and reducing, carbon emissions, I think I want to go back to Bill Gates' book on climate change. I mean, the fact of the matter is that this is a man that's investing $2 billion into companies that are manufacturing plant-based meats, because of the amount of methane that's putting in the gas by the 80 million cows that we slaughter every year. It's going to affect how much parking we have, because we're going to have to reduce the cement, filtration system to inject cement from carbon. And so my point, Sasha, is that how are we going to change behavior to get people to realize that if we're going to get to 40%, 50% reduction of carbon emissions, it's going to take a real change in how we design our buildings and plan our cities, don't you think?
I agree with that. And but you see, this opened doors to another issue. For example, with the coronavirus, this new Delta variant, and it's all being demonstrated that additional vaccination has to progress to relieve people from this danger. And I've noticed actually that countries in Europe, such as France, Spain, Germany, UK, they have way higher rate of vaccination than here in the United States. And for the first time in at least since 2008, but I think the record goes much longer than that. The you're familiar with S&P 500. It's an index of 500 top companies in the United States. It always outperformed all other markets, specifically European markets. Europe was always behind. Now they have equivalent of S&P 500, which is stocks 600, and there are 600 the top companies in Europe in many different countries. So they are now outperforming S&P 500 for the first time, because S&P American company always had higher valuation. They were more prestigious, they were bigger, they were just anything. And all of a sudden now, for foreseeable future, this company is already outperforming and most likely will continue outperform US companies. So if you combine that with the I mentioned coronavirus issue, and that issue really reflects on the labor market. It reflects on the way how company can hire people, which is now a big issue, because there are a lot of people who are just walking to their corporate offices and say, I need raise 50% in the next half an hour. If not, I'm leaving. So people, for some reason, maybe they stashed a lot of cash, because it's a brave move to go to your superior and ask for 50% raise in half an hour. But people are now bold enough to do that. So if you're thinking about hiring somebody for minimum wages, please forget it. It's not going to happen anymore. There are a lot of people who are not only not going to work for minimum wages, but even for reasonable wages, people will not work until all those subsidies will stop. And even that, after that, it will still take a little bit of time. Who knows, maybe a month or two, until people will realize that, oh, you know what, probably I have to find a job to keep the present lifestyle or so on. So there are many problems, and I didn't even touch half of them that are facing America. And the infrastructure bill, with or without one, there are just too many other problems to deal with. And forget about immigration, forget about Afghanistan, forget about the all the at the best unclear foreign policy. At the best, at the worst, it's very incoherent and probably it's not worth talking about.
It really is. I apologize for the echo, everybody. I don't know what it is. I've got my headsets on, but
Going on over there on the PBS Carolina side and everything. One of the things I was going to say was that, and you actually mentioned it, Afghanistan is definitely another issue that is very important to what's going on in America and all of that. And definitely we're seeing that the Taliban apparently is, coming back and capturing other areas of Afghanistan. It looks like they are rising in power there in the country. And a lot of people were thinking that the Taliban, as well as some of the other enemies out of that part of the world, had been defeated. So it seems like that is not necessarily the case. And it looks like there are even some talks of, as a matter of fact, I know there are some troops coming from Fort Bragg to actually go there and I guess try to use this time to evacuate some of the embassy staff, and who knows how long they're going to be there, because there's also been talk of actually pulling completely out. So I know that there was talk of pulling completely out, but we're also sending troops in. So that seems to be going in two opposite directions and all of that. But I was just wondering, as a politician, your take on that, Steve, because like I said, I had heard we were getting out because supposedly, that was another war that we had won and everything, or we thought that we had won, but maybe not, because maybe they still have some power in that area, and maybe there's a need for the forces that are Western to stay there. But I was just wondering your thoughts on that issue. It is a global issue, but one that is tied to America.
We're going to continue our discussion on infrastructure and get to some other news going around the world, but I think this is an important issue that I continue to have concern about as an elected official, and also looking at the foreign policy of the United States. I mean, clearly there is a problem. We've looked at, Afghanistan pulling out, the Taliban taking over many cities, thousands of Afghanis fleeing their homes, worried, whether cities are going to be taken over. And then you've got the problems in Haiti, the problems in Cuba, the problems in Tunisia, right? And the point is that, first of all, these elected democracies that come in, these governments, they may have they have to balance having a strong state while at the same time having institutions that are strong enough to respect the needs, civil rights of the people that they govern, so you can have a free society. And what happens is the US goes in there, and then we pull out, and then what happens is these strong leaders come in and do whatever they want and suppress, internet, free speech, and the whole notion, they call it illiberal democracy, right? So the best democracies are liberal democracies, like the United States, which is also a little bit in jeopardy, but where you have a strong state, but you also have strong rights of citizens. And so I'm going to deal with Sasha, because Sasha, you're an immigrant from Russia. You're from Russia. You've come to Canada. Don't you think that, we can't be the policeman for the world, but, shouldn't the United States have a better policy than just going in? Now, okay, our troops were there for a long time, and we lost a lot of lives for Afghanistan, right? So I don't know what the solution is. Do we keep some presence there? Do we take former presidents there? Like, well, Jimmy Carter's 96 now. I put an envoy there that can actually help them with creating the strong balance of having a liberal democracy.
Okay, let's go to a recent, not too distant history. And you remember that in 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan
Hmm.
on the pretense that they have to protect democracy there or install democracy there and maybe build a socialist state or maybe not to build socialist state. For some reason, it was, of course, ill-advised decision. There were consequences, but there is one interesting thing. Many Afghani people still remember the presence of Soviet armies in Afghanistan, and they have somehow very nice memories about Russian soldiers there. And at that time, that Russians, I think they left Afghanistan completely in 1990, already at the Gorbachev's time, or at the end of Gorbachev's time, rather to say. So at that time, so we're talking about, say, 10 years period, they built there a lot of schools, hospitals, and they were trying to make the lives of ordinary Afghan people better, if whatever possible, because it's a very, very difficult region, it's a hostile climate, it's terrible mix of population there. So, I mean, there are too many problems. However, they were trying their best there, and people now, 40 some years later, they still remember that. But they're not fond of American, whatever they spent 20 years now in Afghanistan.
Right.
What do they show for that? What forget about the billions and trillions of dollars that it all cost. What has been exactly achieved by US, and why Afghanis would be fond of Americans staying there for 20 years? What would be your answer?
I don't. I mean, Mark, what are your answer to that?
Best I can tell, you bring a very valid point. You bring the point of they've been there, and that's been the situation, not just in Afghanistan. We can go back to Vietnam. We can go back to parts of Korea. We can go back to a couple of other places, including some of the, and it's not just America, it's even some of the other European countries. So we can also go back to some of the African nations as well. So, yes, a lot of times there has been destruction in those areas, and there's not been a real attempt, or at least not a successful attempt, to set up a government of, let's say, a democracy, if that's what you want to bring to those countries. And, that's actually supposed to be up to the people of those countries, if that's the type of government they want. But let's say you want to bring in a style of government that is comparable to ours and all of that. That's not happened. And I haven't really seen a lot of infrastructure brought there. I mean, from what I understand, a lot of their hospitals, speaking of infrastructures, a lot of their hospitals, a lot of their roads, a lot of their other things have been basically decimated. So if anything, we probably have brought some form of destruction there. And if I was a citizen of that country, I would not care whether you were Russian or American. I'm not seeing much of a difference in what happened by either country. And therefore, I'm probably not going to be pleased with either one. And I'm going to try to figure out a way to get you out of the country. So hopefully I can build it up myself, meaning the people of that country. So I'm thinking that in this case, if you want to put it as a divide between Russia and America, or the West versus the East, or whatever, I don't think that the people of those countries are greatly pleased. And I mean, we saw that even with the rise of colonialism around the country and everything. And a lot of those countries fought back and pushed back against colonialism. So in some ways, it may be that those people in those countries are seeing this as a form of what they may call, or scholars may call, neo-colonialism. So definitely, I think that raises a problem, because I think there are a lot of times people in those countries, and this is just my opinion, I do have friends that have lived in different countries around the world. They would, if you're going to come in and help, they would like you to really help, and whether that's humanitarian aid or whether that's helping build them their infrastructure and things of that nature, that I think they would welcome. But that's not what's been happening, in my opinion. Maybe
And I think,
the two of you disagree.
no, and I know, and we're going to go to some other issues going on in the world. I'm going to jump off for a minute and come back. But at the end of the day, if you look at India, for example, we haven't talked about this much on the show. I didn't ask Mr. Chatterjee yesterday, but there's been criticisms of, if you put something on social media and disagree against the government of India, they can order you to take it down, and they can ban you from Facebook and Twitter. So there's a concern that nationalism and the rights of Indians are being threatened. The religious minorities like Christians and Muslims are being targeted. I don't know how much truth is to that, but the fact is, that I think it takes more than just coming in and occupying a country. You've got to make investments in their institutions, and you've got to make sure that their democracies are strong enough not only to be founded but to survive. And it's not an easy balance. And we're seeing nationalistic leaders rise all across the world. Trump was one of them, and Boris Johnson, um, Hungary, just to name a few, right? Russia, and obviously China, the rising superpower, right? So this is going to be the challenge moving forward for the world order.
No,
Well,
no.
I'll tell you one thing. It's obviously by now that you want to call it liberal democracy. That's fine. I don't understand what means liberal democracy, because if democracy is not liberal, it's not democracy in the first place. So how can you say a liberal democracy? I know it's kind of a popular term these days, but I disagree with that 100%. However, the type of democracy what US has, and a few other countries, primarily UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, so maybe a couple more, not more than that. So that type of democracy and world order, America is trying to install, sell, or somehow push around the world. But it's a futile, because even in America, this form of democracy may not survive for long, because actually it's almost collapsed this January, and it's being sort of accepted that, okay, so the guy wanted to stay in White House a little bit longer, so okay, so it didn't work, okay, let's move on, and so on and on and on. But if it didn't work in 2021, it may work indeed in 2025, because if they would plan it more thoroughly, and they would really go for a big deal, and these two people at Department of Justice would sign that the election most likely was not uh, um, valid or illegal, or just call it anything, then they could succeed, and they may succeed next time in 2025. And US public and the Department of Justice and anybody else, they are not doing anything about that. So by the time that they will think about doing something, it will be 2022 election, and if they will lose the House, there will be no time and no opportunity, even if they wanted to and finally decided to do something about it. So why don't you worry about how to keep the democracy right in United States? Why do you need Afghanistan and all this
Yeah, that's a good point, Sasha. I
adventures?
mean, there's problem with the insurrection and everything going on. Now people are saying, "Is America, the United States of America? Why don't we worry about what's going on in our home?" And real quickly, a
Absolutely.
couple of issues going on with the virus. Supreme Court just blocked New York's eviction moratorium, which is interesting. The largest teachers union says it supports vaccine mandates for educators, and Virginia is going to require all K through 12 schools to have masks. And San Francisco will bar unvaccinated people from indoor dining, concerts, and other events. I think that's a great idea. And and I think at the end of the day, and we talked about Governor Cuomo, he's probably moving his stuff out right now from the governor's mansion and the governor's office, because Kathy Hochul, I think, has been sworn in, and then of course instability in Afghanistan. So and in North Carolina, we're looking at an announcement being made soon about masks. Um, we've got the anti-vaxxers, the anti-maskers, people saying you're taking away my freedom. But at the end of the day, I think that we know that the science showing that if you wear a mask, you prevent spread, and we've got to get people vaccinated, and that's the only way we're gonna. I think Canada's over 70%. In the
Yeah.
U.S., we're only around 58. In North Carolina, 62%. partially vaccinated, but the
Yeah.
U.S. about 58%. So we've got a long way to go, and
Yeah, hey, Steve, along those same lines, and definitely I agree that we have a long way to go and all of that. But, one of the things that I found fascinating, and I was hoping that Nick would come in because I was looking for Nick to join into the conversation and everything. I was actually going to call his name and everything. So I did see him backstage. But one of the things I was going to say is that I actually had a fascinating conversation yesterday. We were talking about masks and the folks that don't want to wear the mask, like the protests that have been going on in Tennessee. They've actually been at each other's yelling matches, and in some cases even physical altercations. And that's not the only state. There are several other states where those kind of things have happened. But I was talking to a friend of mine that lives in they've actually got, because they do teaching online in the university situation, so they've actually got two spaces that they stay at between Phoenix and Nevada and all of that. But they were actually of the opinion that there weren't a lot of anti-mask protests around the country, because around the world. They knew there were a lot around the country, but they were like saying that they had not heard much around the world. So, me being the researcher, I looked it up and seeing that there had been protests in Canada, there had been protests in Finland, there had been protests in Denmark, even where Shaquille is in Australia. So this anti-mask sentiment, and that's just for the countries that I saw. There were a number of other ones as well, even Italy, where Mr. Spano is, and definitely the UK, and a number of other places. So I don't think that we need to think that this anti-mask sentiment is just a United States issue, because apparently there are anti-maskers around the world that don't want to wear the mask also. So I know that I was actually thinking that you might have been going already, because a friend of mine was thinking that you had already left, but I guess that trip is later on in the week. But as one that travels, what is your thoughts about the fact that there might be this anti-mask sentiment, not just here in the United States, but around the globe?
Well, my thoughts are I'm going to try to beam into the World Edition when I'm traveling. We'll have to see how the data plans work. But in terms of the anti-mask and mask, look, I hate to wear a mask. I'm asthmatic. I'm congested all the time. Last thing in the world I need is something over my nose when I have a hard time breathing. So I hate to wear a mask. However, here's the reality. If the people that are anti-maskers could actually read, which I doubt, understand studies, which I also doubt. The studies show this, that if one person masks, the other one doesn't. The odds of you contracting the disease drops to less than 20%, around 17% to contract the virus that you have. If two people wear a mask, they did studies, it's 1% or less. Seriously. Okay, that this particular disease, the coronavirus, would actually be transmitted. So what you're doing is you're taking a rate from 100. By the way, it's 100%. If you and I just got together and one of us was had coronavirus. So what you did mathematically, and I know this is really hard for a lot of Americans who failed math. What you're really doing is you're taking your probabilities from 100% to 1%. And I know they have a hard time with probabilities, but that's what you're doing, is 100% to 1%. By the way, less than 1% of getting a disease is good, 100% of getting it is bad. So you got to spoon feed these people because they really don't understand anything. Because I don't have the time or patience to spoon feed these people. Okay, my thoughts are I would do like they do with smallpox. They made it a criminal offense. You don't take it, good. We'll put you in jail.
That's the only way you're going to deter behavior.
Hey, Steve, I don't care. I look for things that work. And this is the reason I tend to agree with Sasha. This democracy stuff doesn't really work in a lot of countries, including this country. In a lot of respects, that's the reason you put the hammer down. Okay. In other words, okay. And we have precedents all the way back to 1908 in the very famous case, Jacobson versus Massachusetts, which, oddly enough, in Florida, where I practice law, the First Circuit overlooked, but the Supreme Court of the United States apparently didn't overlook it. And they said, look, yeah, companies and governments can mandate a mask wearing, and they can actually mandate the vaccine. Too bad, deal with it.
Yeah,
okay, and that's it.
Exactly. And I think, and that's, because I know some people that are against vaccine. Okay, when you're young and you're healthy, you feel immortal, that I can never be sick.
That's true. When I was under 30, I never got vaccines.
But at the end of the day, when you see someone on a ventilator I knew a marathon
Oh, I
runner
can't
that
say
got a
never.
breakthrough infection, and he's about to die. I mean,
Yeah,
he's
yeah. I'm sorry. When I was under 30, I still got a smallpox vaccine,
yeah.
and also, and I got some other vaccines like
But the
MMR.
bottom line is that
You know,
we have to make, okay, here's my analogy of the day before we get back to some of the other issues we talked about. And I want to get Nick's opinion about infrastructure. Nick, we talked about the bipartisanship, the 4 reasons why it passed, which is, not as a divisive an issue. President Biden's experience of getting on the phone and reaching out to the Senate, McConnell's calculus of, hey, let me get behind this thing so I can at least get reelected in my two-term and in the midterms, and then Sinema and Manchin and the moderate centrists that came to the table. But real quickly, here's the point I would make. When we go on an airplane, we can't take a gun on the airplane, right? Because it's a weapon, right? You can't do that. You have a security, right? The weapon that we're talking about is inside us. It's a virus. If you're not vaccinated, that weapon, if it gets to someone else, can hurt them, can make them sick, can potentially kill them, right? Why would we allow people to just say, well, it's about my freedom? No, this isn't about your freedom. I would go on a plane. I want to be safe. I want to have a gun. Well, you can't have a gun on a plane. You can't take a gun into a park.
Steve, why are you bothering with reason and logic? So this is the problem with the liberals in general. They believe. Oh, come on.
The people are telling me what to do. You're taking away my freedom.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly what we're doing. But see, you're trying to use reason and logic. I don't use reason and logic on my dog, and I don't use it on certain people. There is no reason or logic. This is what you're going to do. Period. The end. You don't like it? It's the word called too bad. I'm not going to sit and reason with these people.
I don't want to wear a seatbelt when I drive.
Okay, well, too bad. And the thing is, here's what I did. Somebody came in my house to do a job. Okay, and the thing is, are you vaccinated? No. Okay. Well, good. Here's the deal. You're fired. Goodbye. And the guy that was is the guy I hired. I have the total right to do that.
You totally have the right to do that, Nick.
Absolutely.
No doubt you have the right to do that. Hey, Nick, I did have a quick question.
By the way, I wasn't going to reason with him. I'm not going to sit and say, oh, well, here's the reason why. No, there is no reason. You're fired. Goodbye. Next.
No, I agree with you and everything. And speaking of next, and I know that we have this other great show, the Lawyer's Den and all that. And I just want to bring up really quickly because I know that definitely Steve has some infrastructure issues that he still wants to talk about as well. But, the courts are about to get deluged, and there probably already are, with cases in New York because of something that they did recently. And I'd love to know your thoughts about this. But for 2 years, New York temporarily set aside its usual time limit on civil lawsuits, because, they wanted to allow victims of childhood sexual abuse to sue the churches, hospitals, schools, camps, scout groups, and other institutions that they held responsible for enabling a certain very dastardly kind of people and turning a blind eye to those folks as they were committing wrongdoings. And they're saying that window closes tomorrow, actually. And they've already had more than 9,000 lawsuits filed. So they're saying a deluge of impact may be felt for many years. And already 4 of the state's Roman Catholic dioceses have filed for bankruptcy, partly as a result of the litigation that has been unleashed by the state's Child Victims Act. So, and there's definitely thousands of other allegations that may be given onto the case as well. So, as one in the legal profession, do you think the courts are ready for this? And will we just be dealing in the New York City area, those people that live there in the New York State area, with this for ages and everything, like maybe even decades? And is this an issue that's going to play a part in what the new governor has to do now that she's coming?
You brought up a great issue. A great issue dealing with the tolling of the statute of limitations. Should the statute of limitations be tolled? Now, of course, I always believe what's good for goose, good for gander. So my first question to them, and I know this isn't going to happen, Mark, is to say, do you believe there should be a statute of limitations on illegal immigration? See the problem? Okay. Well, no, yes. Give me an answer on this one, because think about it. There's no statute of limitations on illegal immigration, but there is a statute of limitations on child abuse. Why would there be such a thing? Are you going to equate? Hey, Mark, are you going to equate illegal immigrants equal to an abuser of a child? You see the problem I'm having with this statute of limitations? So for whatever reason, our companies and individuals who commit child abuse are considered to be holier than a person who immigrates to the United States, who works hard, pays into our system, and they are thrown out. So until we get some justice in the statute of limitations, I've got a real problem with that. So I have a real problem with the immigration rules where we don't have a statute of limitations, and child abuse and other crimes, which you do.
Yes, no,
Nick,
that
and
makes sense.
don't forget that many of these illegal immigrants are paying well more than $750
In
a year
taxes, you're
in
right. They're
taxes.
paying taxes.
Yeah,
They're way much more
Hey,
useful than
Sasha,
certain
they're
people.
paying taxes. They're paying into Social Security, which they can't
Absolutely.
receive.
But
They can't
I
receive.
would
I
like
mean,
to know this, maybe
yeah,
answer your question, Nick. Don't
sure.
forget that it's so much easier to prove that someone is a legal immigrant than somebody who abused a child many years
Yeah,
ago.
right. Yeah, right. No,
Right?
no,
So that's where it's all
I
based.
understand that. But see, the thing is, if you're a child abuser, a sexual child abuser, you're waiting till the statute of limitations run, and they can say, "Hey, look, I abused a lot of kids when I was younger."
Yeah, but
and you're considered okay.
But it's not been proven.
But if
That's
you're
the problem.
but if you're an illegal immigrant, illegal immigrant, oh Lord, you're go to jail. I mean,
Yeah.
Hey, speaking of the illegal immigrants and things along those lines, and I'm actually going to toss it back to Steve now on this great show that he does and all of that. But definitely, what I was going to talk back to him is, that yesterday the Census Bureau came out with their figures and everything, and they said that no racial or ethnic group dominates for those under age 18, and Europeans or white people declined in numbers for the first time on record in the overall U.S. population, as the Hispanic and Asian populations boomed this past decade, according to the 2020 census data. So the figures released Thursday by the U.S. Census Bureau offered the most detailed portrait yet of how the country has changed since 2010, and will also be instrumental in redrawing the nation's political map. So they're saying that this could play a role even in the way that the 1.5 trillion is spent and distributed. So that's why I was going to toss it back to you.
It's being expected for many, many years. So finally, it came.
My thought is this. I was going to close out on this, but I might talk about this next week because I want to devote the Indian Independence Day to close out again. But the fact of the matter is we're getting more diverse, but the population in the United States is going down. It's declining. Actually, it's growing at the slowest rate in nearly a century. But we're more Hispanics, more Asians. You're seeing the browning of America, and every county it's going up, particularly in the urban areas of America. And the white population is going down. It's been declining since the 1960s. And, the bottom line is this. We have an increase of 23 million people in this America since 2010, the United States of America. But they're made up entirely of Hispanic, Asian, Black, or more than one race. And so this is something I'm going to talk about more next week. But here's my theory, folks, as the host of this show. Here's the challenge of America. We're becoming more diverse. And at the same time, we're aging. So think about that. We have a president that's almost 80. Okay. We had a former president that was 73. Right. People are living longer. I'm running for president when I'm 90. Right. Maybe 80. Maybe 80.
Sure. Why not?
If I can get on CNN, maybe I'll go national. Nick, maybe we'll make it happen. Why not? Right? Let's get bold.
Why not? Yeah, right.
Let's get bold and everything. Speaking of getting bold, as I was looking at this, I just saw that unfortunately the African American population is now about to be in third place and everything, and it's not going to be either the Hispanics or the Asians, but the second place group is actually going to be people who identify as a race other than white, Black, Asian, American Indian, Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islander, either alone or in a combination with one of those races, because that actually jumped to 49.9 million people. So, and that surpassed the African American population of 46.9 million people. So that's like a group of folks that don't want to identify as either one group or the other is the second place group now.
But my opening monologue is going to be devoted on this issue. I try to plan these things out. So much going on in the world, and especially hosting World Edition, you're always behind. But the bottom line, here's the point I was trying to make, and I want Sasha to talk about all the panelists talk about this. My theory for the United States of America, I think this is a war for the culture. President Biden says this was the fight for the soul of America, but I think there's a cultural war going on, okay? The reason we're living longer is because of the healthcare system, right? So you can live to 70, 80, 90. My kids might live to 100, right? That's what they're saying. Nick's grandkids can live to 100. The longer you live, you're going to add costs to the healthcare system, right? but the diverse areas are more in the urban areas. So this is having a profound impact on our politics in America, right? If I'm a Republican and I want to hold on power in the legislature, or I want to hold power in the United States Senate or House, where am I going to focus on? I'm going to focus on the rural areas of America, right? I still have an advantage with the electoral system of presidential elections because the rural states have a big swing, right? I think this is what I thought brought Donald Trump to power. This whole idea of a browning of an America and saying, no, I want to speak for the white blue collar worker out there that's lost their job. That where has America been for you, right? And I want to stop immigration, whatever. Sasha, do you think I'm onto something here? Because I think we have two different countries within one country. We have the rural versus the urban. We have white versus black. We have an uncivil war going on, and the division that we're seeing is tremendous in the United States.
It's been around for the last at least 2 years, maybe even longer. Well, I think it's longer for sure, but in the last 2 years it intensified, and it still hasn't been resolved one way or another. And it seems to me there is no way to reconcile all these differences. There has to be a decisive event which will actually make one side winner and another side a loser. And hopefully it's not going to be a real war such as 150 years ago or so. But some event, some very significant out of proportion thing has to happen and resolve it, because if it remains unresolved for a reasonably long time, I think ruling party cannot govern really. Okay, you can win election. First of all, you have to prove that you won election legally. Nobody is going to challenge that. And let's say at the end of the day, you will be declared the winner. And now what? How can you govern? Because everything what you're trying to do will be opposed, fight, and it's impossible to govern in a country like that. Yeah, because everybody believes in his freedoms and all other stories which are absolutely unfounded, and there's no ground whatsoever. What kind of freedom one has if he doesn't have access to top lawyer to defend his freedom? And if he doesn't have that, he is nothing. He has no freedom. He has no rights. Absolutely. And majority of people in America, that's exactly the case. They don't have any freedom. They don't have any rights.
And this is the whole problem of redistricting, the parties in power. Now there's talk about the Republicans in North Carolina wanting to create the new congressional seat outside of the county. They want to create another Republican seat to add a majority and only have 4 Democrats in Congress. And how are they going to do it? They're going to gerrymander. They're going to find so many different ways to pack minority candidates into one district, right? And so we could go on, but let's close out here today. I got to.
Yeah, we're getting ready to close out. It's about that time anyway. One of the things that I'm going to toss it back to you as part of the close out, but also to mention a new show that we have here on the network, because they actually brought up an issue and everything called Face the News with Barbara H. Smith and Lotus Riche. But they do a counterpoint kind of show and things of that nature. And it's every Thursday at 7 o'clock at 7 p.m. And they actually brought up an interesting concept that we've kind of alluded to today and everything, which is that every time we turn around, and definitely Sasha talks about the concept of freedom in the Western countries, but it seems like every time there is an issue, we go to war. And that's the term that we use, whether it's the immigration war, or the war against immigrants, whether it's the war against drugs, whether it's the war against the vaccinations, either for or against, and all of that. So we seem to have this mentality that everything has to be a war, and whether that's kind of like a us against them kind of mentality that always happens in these fights that we go in. I mean, shucks, there's even a war against homelessness and a war against some of these other things. So I'm going to toss it to you, and I know you're going to close it out with infrastructure and everything else. But as a politician, Steve, what do you think about this concept? Because it does seem like anytime there's an issue, then there's also a war. And sometimes these are like rhetoric types of wars and all. And I'm sitting there going like, is it really a war, or are we just trying to like solve a problem? And do we have to call it a war? So definitely I'd love to know your thoughts, because it does seem like all the time, I don't care whether you're a U.S. politician, or meaning a national one or a state one, there's always seems to be these kind of like phrases that it's a war on this or a war on that. And I just think that that gives that kind of mentality of an us and them mentality. Even the war against, war against black crime, or war against black on black crime, or the war against the police, or whatever else you want to call it. I was just wondering your thoughts.
Well, that's a great segue into my closeout, and I think at the end of the day, we're building a foundation of democracy. And as the poet Anita Gorman said, America is more than a pride you inherit. Um, it's a past that you step into and repair it. And I think rather than making it a war, which implies you're going to hurt or kill, or we think of war, weapons of war, we need to be building bridges with each other and finding common ground. And I think that's like when you build a house, that builds a foundation. But you can't have a foundation if you're just having a war on everything, right? Which leads me to my final point as I close out. Yesterday, we celebrated Indian Independence Day. We had Swadesh Chatterjee here to talk about the future of India. But I want to use this opportunity to say that I do think the one thing we can learn from Indian independence is a lesson that all of us can learn from World Edition, is that many great leaders like Gandhi were unpopular at the time. They wanted to step into their nations, like the poor Gorman said, and said, repair it, right? They wanted to get rid of the British Empire. But how he did it was unpopular at the time, but he wasn't willing to take the fight on, inspire others around him. No one ever thought that the British would leave, but eventually they did, because they knew that a man in a loincloth and barely robed could make salt in the ocean and could put British away because of a civil disobedience strike, which would eventually leave the continent of India, and go all the way inspire Dr. Martin Luther King, a civil rights leader who went on to have a dream. I think it's time for us to realize that we can, like Gandhi, be the change we seek to be in the world. This is an important lesson for us to teach the children of our nation and our world. The politicians cannot solve the problem. They have clearly proven that. But the people in our nations can solve the problem. They can implement change. And that's what it's going to take at the grassroots level. That's my message on this Indian Independence Day weekend. Be the change you want to seek in the world. Long live the concept of Mahatma K. Gandhi, a man who freed India today to become the world's largest democracy. Maybe there's a little Gandhi, a little Dr. King, a little Mandela, a little Mother Teresa, a little Rosa Parks that lives and resides in each one of us. Let's share it with the world. And if we do that, I think we can end World Edition on a positive note. And our light of hope will always lift us out of the darkness. We will eventually get out of the dense fog which surrounds us. We'll be back on Monday. Happy Indian Independence Day to all who are listening to World Edition. Long live India. Long live the United States of America. And long live Canada and every nation, and my panelists who are here with us today, whether they're from Australia, New Zealand. We love you all. We are one world. We are one race, the human race. Thank you so much.